Everything you've ever seen of Babylon, the blue Ishtar Gate, the hanging gardens, the ziggurat that scraped the sky, is from the wrong city. Those came 1,000 years too late. The Babylon that built them was the second draft. The first one, the original Babylon, the Bronze Age city ruled by a king named Hammurabi, has never been excavated. It's still there. We just can't reach it. And the man who built it is the most famous king in legal history, and one of the most poorly documented. This is what we know about the city we lost. In the year we'd call 1792 BC, a young man named Hammurabi inherited a small kingdom on the Euphrates. Babylon at this point was about the size of a modern town. 40 kilometers south was Sippar. 100 kilometers east, Eshnunna. South of that, Larsa. Further still, Ur. Each one ruled by its own king, each one with its own gods, each one with armies, walls, treasuries. Mesopotamia in 1792 BC wasn't a country, it was a chessboard. And we know exactly where Hammurabi sat on that chessboard because one of his rival's diplomats wrote a letter about it. The letter is from a man named Itur-Asdu, around 1770 BC. He's reporting back to his king, Zimri-Lim of Mari, on the political situation. And he writes, "There is no king who is strong by himself. 10 or 15 kings follow Hammurabi of Babylon. As many follow Rim-Sin of Larsa, Ebal-Pl of Eshnunna, Amut-Pl of Katna. And 20 kings follow Yarim-Lim of Yamhad." Hammurabi is fourth on this list. He has 15 vassals. The man at the top has 20. And there are at least 4 other regional powers in the same league. This is not a man on the verge of building an empire. This is a mid-table king in a fractured world. And then, everything changed. Hammurabi waited. For 30 years, he ruled Babylon quietly. Irrigation projects, temple repairs, diplomacy. The Mari archives show him micromanaging sheep merchant disputes by personal letter. And then, in his 30th year on the throne, something snapped. He invaded Larsa. The next year, Eshnunna. The year after, the entire Upper Tigris coalition. By his 38th year, every rival on Itur-Asdu's list was gone, except one. Mari, the kingdom of Zimri-Lim, the man who had been his ally. In 1761 BC, Hammurabi marched on Mari and burned it to the ground. The fire was so complete it baked 25,000 cuneiform tablets in the palace archives, preserving them for a French expedition that wouldn't arrive for another 36 centuries. Without that fire, we would not know who Hammurabi was. And here is the strange part. We have his enemies' letters. We have Zimri-Lim's intelligence reports about Hammurabi. We have the diplomatic gossip from 12 neighboring kingdoms. But the letters Hammurabi himself sent, those went home to Babylon. And Babylon sits on a water table so high, the German expedition that dug here for 15 years never reached the Bronze Age layer. One drought year sounding in 1913 got close. That's it. So when we walk through Hammurabi's Babylon, we walk through Mari instead. Same period, same architecture, same gods. Mari is what Babylon must have looked like. Mud brick walls 3 stories high, inner courtyards open to the sun, a throne room painted with goddesses presenting weapons to the king. Beyond that, 260 rooms, administrative offices, an ice house, kitchens cooking for 1,000 people, and the archive that the fire saved. This is the world Hammurabi ruled. And in his 38th year, at the peak of an empire that had just devoured every rival in Mesopotamia, he set a stone. And here is what nobody tells you about that stone. It was almost certainly never used. The Code of Hammurabi has 282 laws. We have tens of thousands of court records from the old Babylonian period. Across all of them, not one judge ever cites this stone. The verdicts contradict it. The penalties are different. The procedures are different. Modern Assyriologists, Kraus, Botero, Van de Meerup, agree. This is not a statute book. It's a monument. It says in stone that the king is just. The penalties on it aren't instructions. They're advertisements. And once you read it as advertising, the laws become much more interesting. If a builder build a house for a man and do not make its construction firm, and the house collapse and cause the death of the owner, that builder shall be put to death. If it cause the death of the son of the owner, they shall put to death the son of that builder. The lex talionis, eye for an eye, son for a son. It's so famous that we forget. 300 years before Hammurabi, the older code of Ur-Nammu solved the exact same case with a payment of silver. For the upper class, Hammurabi's law was a regression toward harsher punishment, not progress. But step away from the courtroom and the stone, and the Babylon Hammurabi ruled comes alive. In a courtyard somewhere in this city, two men sit on a reed mat in the late afternoon, sharing a shoulder-high jar of barley beer. They drink it through meter-long bent reed straws tipped with copper strainers to keep the husks out. A boy in the school of scribes, the Eduba, bites his lower lip into a wet clay tablet, trying to remember the difference between two cuneiform signs. House F at Nippur preserved his exercises. The bite mark is still in the clay. A Baru priest holds a steaming sheep's liver up to lamplight and traces a groove called the presence on the left lobe. If the groove is shallow, the king will not march to war this season. If it's deep, he will. A widow at dusk pours. The priest tells the king, don't march. Sometimes the king listens. How do we know? Because his enemy's wife wrote it down, beer into a wall niche above her father's burial under the kitchen floor. She whispers his name. It's the new moon. This is the kispum, and every household in Babylon does it. A bride stands before a scribe at a wooden table. Her bridegroom pushes silver across. The scribe shapes a marriage contract with a reed stylus. 3 witnesses watch. Without the tablet, section 128 of the code, she is not a wife. Somewhere in the palace, a queen named Shibtu writes to her husband Zimri-Lim, before the fire, about an oracle she has just received concerning Hammurabi. That man whose days are numbered. He will not live long. The man whose days are numbered is Hammurabi. Shibtu's husband, Zimri-Lim, the king of Mari, will be dead within 5 years. Hammurabi will outlive him by a decade. Hammurabi died in 1750 BC, after a 42-year reign. He left behind the largest empire Mesopotamia had ever seen. Every major city in the south, the entire Euphrates corridor, vassal kings as far as the Mediterranean coast. His son, Samsu-Iluna, inherited it. Within 9 years, the entire south rose in revolt. Within 30 years, half the empire was gone. Within a century, a Hittite raiding party rode down the Euphrates, sacked the city, and left. Babylon fell silent for 300 years. When it returned as the Babylon you've heard of. And here's the twist. Stephanie Dalley argues the Hanging Gardens were never in Babylon at all. That Sennacherib built them in Nineveh, 600 kilometers north. Babylon got someone else's wonder. Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon, the Hanging Gardens, the Blue Ishtar Gate. That city was 1,000 years downstream from Hammurabi, and it was built directly on top of his. The water table that buries the original is the same water table the Euphrates has carried for 4,000 years. The river that fed Hammurabi's empire, the river his irrigation laws regulated, his merchants traded along, his armies marched beside, is the river that now drowns the city he built. And we are left with what survived. A stone in the Louvre carved with 282 laws his own courts ignored. 25,000 letters his enemies wrote about him. A palace at Mari that burned at the moment he stopped being a mid-table king and started being an emperor. That's the entire portrait we have, and from it we know him, better in some ways than we know the Caesars. Empires that look permanent rarely are. Hammurabi's lasted one lifetime. Built on alliances he eventually betrayed, carried by trade networks that worked until they didn't, recorded in clay that only survived because his enemies were burned alive in their own palace. Same pattern, 3,700 years later. We just don't see it from inside. If the most famous lawgiver in history wrote laws his own courts ignored, what was the code actually for? Drop your theory below. And if you want the full story of how the Bronze Age died and the city that fell silent for 3 centuries, watch this video next.